Arriving at Athens' new international airport, there's no obvious sign that Greece is in dire straits. It all looks pretty normal. But 10 years after joining the euro, this country is effectively bankrupt, and the government has put the airport up for sale. I haven't been to Greece for 20 years since I came as a government minister, and Athens just had an old-fashioned airport in those days at a different location from this beautiful new one. And Greece had its own currency, the drachma. Since then, the country's been through an economic boom when borrowing was cheap and the government and the people went on a spending binge. Now have come the years of bust, and I believe that Greece's crisis is due to having joined the euro. But will the Greeks agree with me? I want to find out whether this crisis has shaken their faith in the single currency. Prime Minister.
Hello.
What a pleasure, thank you. Will they take my advice and get out, and so recover competitiveness with a free-floating drachma? Don't worry if I take out my wallet, I'm not in any way trying to corrupt you. Do you want the euro or the drachma? Locked into the euro, the Greeks are facing drastic austerity measures, measures that some of them believe are being imposed by Germany. Later, I'll go to meet the German taxpayers who are contributing to Greece's mammoth bailout. Guten Morgen.
Ich bin nicht dafür, dass die Griechen überhaupt Geld bekommen. Die sollen mal ihre Arbeit machen und nicht alles kaputt.
You've probably seen the way Greek papers have been depicting you. How do you feel about this? Is this the moment that the Eurozone becomes more united, or will it be pulled apart? It's only when you take a walk through the streets of Athens that you get a sense of the situation that this country's in. I can't believe that I'm in Europe in 2012. It's hard to imagine how such a small nation of 11 million people could have accumulated a national debt equivalent to 31,000 euros per man, woman and child. Athens wears the face of recession. Here's a shopping complex with every business closed bar one, which is selling its goods at a 50% discount. Graffiti is universal. Here, a bank has been burnt out. Everywhere are signs of dereliction. A quarter of the shops have closed since Greece's crisis first took hold 4 years ago. And sights like this have become commonplace. Here at this one location, 800 people queue each afternoon for their daily rations. This queue is for migrants who were the first to suffer from the crisis. 30 yards away, I see preparations for further handouts, this time for Greek people. This is a new phenomenon in a country where family support is normally so strong. Their numbers, which are growing every day, have risen to 20,000 in Athens alone.
There are people who come here and have problems.
Civil servant Dimitra Nusi now runs the food distribution for this part of Athens. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
How many people will you be feeding here today?
1,250 people daily.
That's amazing.
Yes, the number has been going up the last months, especially because of the crisis.
Now, I understand that a few years ago you were, I think, a civil servant working on the Olympic Games.
I'm still a civil servant.
So you personally have gone in quite a short period of time from managing wealth to managing poverty.
Yes, only in some months. It's a shock.
A shock.
From European projects, from ambitious breakthrough projects, to slices of bread for poor people.
Do you find that the people who are coming here to receive the food suffer a real problem with their dignity, with their loss of status?
Yes, these people feel it, and it's very normal. They feel very embarrassed. We have to find a way to survive with dignity. We are not experienced to this kind of poverty, to start counting the slices of the bread.
The scenes that I've witnessed here remind me of those black and white photographs of the American Great Depression of the 1930s. The fact that it's happening in 21st century Europe seems to me incredible. How did all this come about?
The launch of the euro is the dawn of a new age, according to the European Central Bank, as 12 countries take the plunge.
The euro was introduced on New Year's Day 2002. Joining it was supposed to help weak economies like Greece catch up with their richer Eurozone partners. I've come to pay my respects at this shrine to the drachma, Greece's last national currency. It gave up the right to print its own money in favour of joining a broader European dream. In my view, a weak economy like Greece should never have shared the same currency with Germany, the economic powerhouse of Europe. The weak drachma made it easy to export Greek tomatoes and olives, but being part of the stronger euro has made Greece uncompetitive and sucked in manufactured imports. And this is just the sort of manufactured import that flooded into Greece once it had joined the euro. The Greeks went on a buying spree of German luxury cars, cars like the Porsche Cayenne. This car and the euro were launched in the same year, and their stories are intertwined. Produced by the technological wizardry of Germany, the middle classes of non-industrial Greece aspired to own it, and this car turned into the symbol of German manufacturing might and the Greek economic bubble. To help me to understand just what happened in Greece after it joined the euro, I've arranged an appointment with a man who's taken a special interest in the origin of Greece's debt crisis.
Hi, Yason, how are you?
Hi, Michael. How are you?
Economist and hedge fund manager Yason Manolopoulos. Tell me, a lot of people think that the figures to enable Greece to join the euro were rigged. You know, the figures on the deficit and so on. Is that true? Were the figures rigged?
Common acknowledgement that they were rigged. Everybody in the European Commission also knew it. But again, Greece joining was a political project back then, rather than a purely economic project.
Describe to me those boom years after Greece has joined the euro, around the time of the Olympics. What was it like?
So you had all these fancy villas springing up. You had huge amounts of spending in luxury goods. People taking weekend trips to Paris rather than going to their local village. A huge sense of, just general sense of euphoria. Everybody was happy going out. Greece had won the football, the Euro. We had the Olympics. It was like a dream come true. People were allowed to have a lifestyle that they hadn't enjoyed previously. At one point in time, in 2010, there were 8 billion of car loans in Greece.
8 billion?
8 billion. That was 3.5% of GDP, compared to zero 10 years ago.
Would Greeks have been able to buy as many cars like this as they did under the euro?
Oh, absolutely not. During the 80s, the cars on the streets here were predominantly French, Italian, and Japanese. And, these luxury cars are German cars. Reputation was not worth the money, i.e. too expensive. The strong exchange rate that Greeks had by being in the euro helped them, but also more importantly, the availability of cheap credit to finance these purchases made all these imports of cars come to Greece.
Greece now had access to the Eurozone's low interest rates. In just 6 years, Greece's deficit with Germany went from under 3 billion euros to over 8 billion. The Great Greek Euro boom ended abruptly in 2008, when the global economy crashed. Since then, Greece has plunged into one of the most drastic recessions in recent international history. I've been trawling the internet to see how many luxury cars are for sale, and the answer is thousands, including hundreds of Porsche Cayennes. And there's one here being sold by Doros of Piraeus. Doros Liapis, whose electrician's business isn't faring too well in the current economic climate, has had the car on the market for 7 months. Doros, this is a lovely car, but why did you want to buy one?
Είναι ένα όμορφο αυτοκίνητο. Είναι αυτοκίνητο ασφαλές. Αγοράσανε μία τάξη μεσαία η οποία πήγαινε καλά η δουλειά τους και οι δουλειές πηγαίνανε καλά και έτσι το αποκτήσαμε. Κάποια στιγμή υπήρχε αρκετή δουλειά, υπήρχαν χρήματα. Όλη η οικογένεια είχε από ένα αυτοκίνητο. Είχαμε 5 αυτοκίνητα. Ο γιος μου, η κόρη μου, η γυναίκα μου, εγώ. Τώρα όμως αναγκαστήκαμε και τα πουλήσαμε. Δεν υπάρχουν δουλειές, δεν υπάρχουν οι προϋποθέσεις να το κρατήσουμε. Και γι' αυτό θα αναγκαστούμε να το πουλήσουμε.
Can you remember how many euros this cost you?
Αυτό στοίχησε γύρω στα 45.000 ευρώ.
So, if you do manage to sell it, will you make a big loss on the car?
Ναι, θα χάσω τα μισά χρήματα. Μπορεί και παραπάνω από τα μισά, αλλά τα μισά σίγουρα θα τα χάσω.
Now, you're not going to go without a car. Have you acquired a new one?
Έχω πάρει ένα smart εδώ.
What, this one here?
Yes.
This is a little bit smaller than...
Smaller.
But it's a very nice car.
Αυτό το φτιάχνει η Mercedes, το αυτοκίνητο. Και είναι μια εταιρεία smart, η μηχανή του είναι Mercedes.
It's a Mercedes.
Yes.
So even though you've had to get rid of your lovely big German Porsche, you end up with a tiny little Mercedes.
Ναι, αυτό το αυτοκίνητο είναι μικρό της Γερμανίας.
Doris, you still have, at the moment, a Porsche, although you're selling it, you still have a little Mercedes smart car. Lots of people would love to be in this position. Are you in this position because Greece is in the Euro?
Το ευρώ πιστεύω ότι έδωσε αρκετά πολλά καλά στην Ελλάδα. Τώρα, αν τα πράγματα λόγω πολιτικής είναι λίγο διαφορετικά εδώ, πιστεύω ότι θα ξαναπάμε εκεί που είμαστε.
It's a feast day, and Doris has invited me to a family dinner, prepared by his wife Katerina and his unemployed daughter Eleni. Although it's a holiday, his son and business partner Sakis is away finishing a job. So Doris,
Yes.
at one time, your electrician's business, how big was it?
Είχαμε μέχρι 10 άτομα.
And now how big is the business?
Τώρα λόγω της κρίσης έχουμε σταματήσει. Δεν έχουμε άτομα. Τώρα είναι μικρή επιχείρηση. Έχουμε μένει 2 άτομα. Έχουμε μένει εγώ και ο γιος μου. Δηλαδή το τελευταίο καιρό στο πάει και δυσκολεύουν πιο πολύ τα πράγματα. Υπάρχουν εταιρείες που έχουμε κάνει κάποιες δουλειές. Αρκετά μεγάλη εταιρεία, η οποία εδώ και 1,5 χρόνο μας χρωστάει αρκετά χρήματα και δυσκολεύεται να μας πληρώσει. Το μέλλον είναι αβέβαιο.
Eleni, did you lose your job?
Yes, I lost my job 1.5 years ago. I was secretary in a shipping and insurance company.
Are you looking for a job?
Yes, I'm looking a long time, but I didn't find it yet.
Now something I'd like to ask you all.
Yeah.
Okay, Doris. Here's a choice for you.
Yes.
Euros
Λίρες.
or drachmas?
Euro.
Which do you choose?
I prefer Euro, of course.
And Katerina, which are you going to choose?
Money. Γιατί δεν μου αρέσει η δραχμή. Πιστεύω ότι θα γυρίσουμε πίσω, δεν θα πάμε μπροστά. Είχαμε χρήμα, αρκετό, περάσαμε καλά, 10 χρόνια δηλαδή, ήταν η Ελλάδα πλούσια, εγώ πιστεύω, βάσει στο ευρώ. Το ευρώ δεν φταίει, αν οι κυβερνήσεις κάνανε λάθος επιλογές, τα σκορπίσανε, πήραν αρκετά χρήματα και κάνανε κακή διαχείριση και βρεθήκαμε τώρα εδώ. Κακό.
I'm touched by Doris and his family's attachment to the euro. But maybe it's not surprising because interest rates were sky high while Greece had the drachma. Like many here, this family blamed the politicians for the mess Greece is in. But then Doris did very well out of public sector contracts, because if Greek families borrowed and spent to excess, the Greek government put their profligacy in the shade. The results of Greek government expenditure after joining the euro can be seen all over Athens. Many metro stations received lavish upgrades, and new stations have been opened, expanding the network into the suburbs. There's also a new electric railway system that rivals anywhere in Europe. There's no doubt that new railways and trains like these helped the Greek economy and enabled it to modernise. The problem was that most of the equipment couldn't be manufactured in Greece, so it had to be imported with borrowed money.
Next stop, Koropi.
It's no surprise that the carriages, engines and signalling equipment was supplied by German companies. And the money that countries like Germany and France lent to Greece also went into keeping these state operations going. Each year, the railways alone were losing almost 1 billion euros. But Greece's most notorious public expenditure bonanza was on the 2004 Olympic Games. Today, 8 years after the Olympics, all over Athens, buildings and facilities lie unused. Meanwhile, Greece is still paying the interest on the 12 billion euros that the Games eventually cost. Tassos Teleglou is an investigative journalist who's written extensively on the financial fiasco of the Athens Olympics. So what I see now is a place that's deserted, but obviously that cost billions of euros to build, and a lot of money was borrowed. As you look back on it now, would one regard the Olympics in Greece as a success?
It was a lot of money spent with, as you can see, post-Olympic use that is equal to nothing.
Nothing, you would say?
Yes, it's equal to nothing. This park is a mirror of a society and a country that there is always a lack of investigating the cheaper possibilities. There is a lot of corruption and clientelism, where to put our friends to make some money.
Jobs for the boys.
Jobs for the boys of the right party. And this, of course, when the money was cheaper and accessible, was easy to do, it was easy to manage, but it isn't anymore.
So Tassos, let me put a very straightforward choice to you. Euro or drachma for Greece?
Euro. Because my generation was brought up with the dream that we were going to have a currency like that. A stable currency.
And the drachma?
The drachma was the currency in which I was paid when I started working, and I had to pay 25% interest for my credit card, which I don't like.
But your dream, I think, has become a nightmare.
Well, it's a very straight jacket, but I think Greece anyway needs a straight jacket.
The yachting marinas on the seafront at Piraeus, Athens' port city, give another clue to the story of Greece's record-breaking debt. Taxes. The Greeks notoriously failed to pay them. Since the crisis, over 1,000 luxury yacht owners have been discovered falsely claiming tax exemptions. Yeah, so it's a lovely marina. There's been a lot in the British press about the number of yachts that there are belonging to Greek people, apparently rather more than Greek people declaring high incomes to the tax authorities. Is this true?
There was a lot of tax evasion in Greece over the period, and all this cash that was generated had to find outlets, and these yachts were one of the luxury products where they went.
Across the economies of the Eurozone, there are huge differences in cultural attitudes and institutions that to me make them incompatible as partners in a single currency. Now, is this really a cultural thing? I mean, is it just that Greeks don't trust their institutions, or is it just that they're not used to paying taxes?
Well, I think it starts from the reverse. Greece has weak institutions, and if these weak institutions cannot impose a fair tax system, so let's say you were in the restaurant business or the souvlaki business, and your competitor doesn't pay his VAT, 23%, and you do, how can you compete on a commodity product like that? So you're forced in some sense. So the Greek system isn't corrupt, but it's corrupting.
How good is the Greek state at assessing and collecting taxes?
There's no cross-checking. Everything's done manually. There's no IT systems. This was an uncontrollable monster. Nobody really knew what was going on.
I'm getting the impression from you that many of the problems that Greece has encountered, it would not have faced if it had kept the drachma. So I have to ask you now, for Greece's future, the drachma or the euro?
Well, I'm going to have to choose the euro because Greece has weak institutions and a corrupt political system. Neither of it will change if you go back to the drachma. and it will give them the access to a printing press to continue the ways of before.
So, no takers for my drachmas yet. Even Jason's not persuaded by my Eurosceptic views. I think that to become more competitive, a country needs to keep the option of devaluing its own currency. Whilst not ideal, the alternative can be much worse.
Απολύτως εργαζόμενους. Να φύγουν τώρα αυτοί που κυβερνάνε, οι Τροϊκάνοι και οι υπηρέτες τους.
Almost every day there's a demonstration against the austerity measures. Today it's scientists from the National Institute of Mineralogy. They're venting their anger against the trio of foreign institutions known as the Troika. That's the European Union, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. Their particular ire is reserved for the Environment Minister, George Papakonstantinou. I've decided to pay a visit to Mr. Papakonstantinou. Hello, Minister. Michael Portillo.
Nice to meet you.
What a pleasure to see you. Thank you very much for your
to see you
time. Until recently, he was the Greek Minister of Finance, which was surely the job from hell. I was once pretty unpopular when I was a politician. People cheered when I lost my seat in Parliament. But I must say, since I've been in Greece, I've been shocked by how unpopular politicians are. There seems to be a real feeling against the political class.
It is impossible for an active Greek politician to walk on the streets today.
Really?
Not because it will be attacked, but because it will be very easy for someone to turn around and call them a traitor. People are waking up to the fact that there was a bubble and the bubble was burst, that part of their living standards were not based on solid foundations. Unfortunately, those that are paying from the crisis are also those that were not responsible for the crisis.
I was Chief Secretary of the Treasury trying to control public spending. I thought I had things tough, but you had to negotiate the austerity package here in Greece. I mean, tell me, how was that for you? Were you sleeping at night?
Well, you were never faced with a situation whereby you had to take very harsh measures that change people's livelihoods and increase taxes, and ended up increasing unemployment, and a very tough negotiation at the end for the biggest bailout package ever with an austerity program attached to it was not the easiest time, as I'm sure you can imagine.
And don't worry if I take out my wallet, I'm not in any way trying to corrupt you. The drachma and the euro.
Well,
which is the future of Greece?
I've forgotten what this looks like. It was very nice for the past. It's not for the future. This is the future, and I'm surprised you're not waving a British pound, but this will not be our choice either.
In exchange for rescue packages that eventually mounted to 240 billion euros, about 200 billion pounds, Mr. Papakonstantinou and his successors have had to increase taxes, make savage cuts in government spending, and put many of Greece's national assets up for sale.
We will follow this road because this is the only road to be able to save the country.
To get a sense of just how hard these measures are beginning to bite, I travel down to the port of Piraeus, which, like many of Greece's national assets, is now up for sale.
Good morning. Morning.
Outside the Perama shipyard, I find unemployed ship repairers keeping a 24-hour vigil, demonstrating their opposition to the government's plans to sell their workplace.
Why are you standing here now? What's the purpose of standing here?
We fight to stay in the public.
You want to stay in the public sector?
Against the government?
Yeah.
Who want to sell it.
Who do they want to sell it to?
Many companies want to buy it to change the used from shipyards to container terminal or car terminal.
How many jobs are there here at the shipyard?
In August 2008 was here about 6,000 workers.
And now?
Today it's only 200.
From 6,000 to 200?
About.
Have you still got a job?
Now, not now.
You haven't got a job. So how much money, what did you used to get? What did they pay in the old days?
Some works are for 1,500 euro the month.
Yes.
Some other 2,000.
Yeah.
The government wants now to make us work for 500 or 600 euro the month. It's nothing. You are a slave after that.
The euro is meant to have brought the disparate nations of Europe together. Their economies were supposed to converge. But I suggest that the opposite has happened. By many economic indicators, Greece has slid back to where it was in 1998, 4 years before it joined the euro. Above the shipyards is one of the hardest hit areas in Greece, the suburb of Perima. Unemployment here has now reached 80%. Yet welfare cuts and increased health charges are compounding the misery. The international organization Doctors of the World recently set up a clinic here.
Good morning. Dr. Ganakis. I'm Michael Portillo. What a very crowded place this is.
Normally, this organization would be providing services in sub-Saharan Africa.
We are in the middle of a humanitarian crisis. People with no food, no access to the health, even no house, so we have no reason to work on Africa, we have to focus here.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello. Who's this?
Angelina.
Hello, Angelina. How very nice to see you. George, hello.
Hello.
How are you? Good to see you. If you went to the hospital now,
Much money.
any idea how much?
More than 100 euro.
100 euros maybe just for an examination?
Yes.
Was it always like this? Did you always have to pay money at the hospital?
No, before we were going free. Now it's different, they changed it.
I understand that your husband is unemployed. What did his job used to be? What's his job?
Carpenter.
A carpenter.
Τώρα πριν 3 χρόνια ήμουνα σε μια εταιρεία κατασκευαστική και δεν μας πλήρωνε.
How long has he been unemployed?
3 years.
Do you and your husband and Angelina have a future in Greece?
No.
It's only with the help of their parents that Leah and George managed to survive. Each time the government negotiates another record-breaking bailout, the IMF and the European institutions impose yet more austerity measures on the Greeks.
It was here in Constitution Square that the anger and frustration of Athenian citizens burst forth. Demonstrators appeared en masse to be back in charge by the police. Rioters threw paving stones and Molotov cocktails. The air was thick with tear gas as the Greek public fought back against austerity.
These young Greeks resent not only the onerous conditions required to remain in the euro, but also that they're being imposed by outsiders. Some, like these rioters, blame Germany as Europe's real power broker. And Greek bitterness is intensified by traumatic memories of German occupation during World War II. But Greeks I've spoken to say they want to stay in the euro. I can't help wondering whether they're truly ready for the political sacrifices will surely follow the financial ones.
It's clear to me that being in the euro has led Greece deep into poverty and to seek bailouts. And such dependency on others can cause feelings of injury and insult. But resentment can cut both ways. It's time to talk to the taxpayers who are funding the rescues, including the people who built this car in Germany.
I've come to East Germany, transformed since the fall of communism. Just outside the city of Leipzig is the most advanced car plant in the world. This is where Porsche built the Cayenne that Doros Liapis is trying to sell. 90% of the cars here are for export. That's good for Germany's balance of payments surplus, but bad for the deficits of countries like Greece that imported large numbers of luxury cars. Advanced technology's got something to do with it, of course, but Germany also benefits from sharing a currency with countries like Greece. These weaker economies pull down the value of the euro, which makes German cars relatively cheaper for foreigners to buy, whether they're in Greece or anywhere else.
So you here see the Cayenne. We will bring that car to the customer as soon as possible.
Because according to PR manager Heiner van der Laden, Porsche's biggest markets are now outside Europe. Is the European Union the most important market for Porsche?
No, traditionally the number one is the US market, and nowadays the second important market is China. And so people from China and from Asia, they like especially the Cayenne.
And these cars, for example, where are they going to?
I have to check. Oh yes, that car goes to China.
I've seen that Greeks like the Cayenne too. In fact, cars have been Germany's biggest category of export to Greece. Vielen Dank. I joined some of the Porsche workers and asked them about their Greek Eurozone partner, who's been giving Germany so much grief in the last few months. If I were a Greek person, and I say, look, we need some help, we're in some difficulty here, and you Germans are pretty well off, you're pretty rich, please help us. What do you say to that?
Also das Thema sehe ich dann eher mit dem Euro und der Europäischen Union so ein bisschen wie eine Ehe. Es ist immer, das heißt in guten und in schlechten Zeiten. Und im Moment ist es halt so, dass der Ehepartner Griechenland ein bisschen ins Wanken geraten ist. Und da wird sich der andere Partner Deutschland sicherlich nicht zurückziehen.
So now I want to offer you a choice for the future of Germany. Is the future of Germany the Euro or the Deutschmark?
Definitiv der Euro.
Why? Warum?
Weil wir eine Exportnation sind. Der Euro ist, glaube ich, für Deutschland das Beste gewesen, was passieren konnte. Also, deshalb wäre es ja schön, wenn England nach Europa kommen würde, mit an einem Strang zieht.
I don't think that's going to happen soon. Which do you choose then?
Der Euro.
Ich entscheide mich definitiv für den Euro und wir würden uns freuen, wenn natürlich noch mehr Länder, zum Beispiel auch England, Schottland, den Weg zum Euro finden und auch die Europäische Union mit unterstützt.
Lars Heinrich and his friends typify the optimism I'm finding here in East Germany.
Der Schritt zurück zur D-Mark ist wie gesagt ein Schritt zurück und der Euro ist die Zukunft.
Of course, these young workers are themselves beneficiaries of a bailout, German style. That was the reunification of Germany more than 20 years ago, and it cost far more than the rescue of Greece today. It followed the collapse of the former communist regime here in the East. Since 1990, the German government has invested almost €1.5 trillion in the economies of cities like Leipzig. The Church of St. Nicholas has a unique place in the story of German reunification. I've come with economist Günther Schnabel, who's researched the costs of rebuilding the German economy after the collapse of the East. After months of peace prayers here, huge demonstrations spread into the town centre.
In 1989, after the service, people left church and started to gather on this square. That's mainly how the demonstrations started. From day to day, they grew and people started to walk through the city and around the city on the Ring Street.
And this monument commemorates those events, does it?
Yes.
Today, Germany is a united democratic country. But even now, West German taxpayers are still transferring money to raise up the East. One example of that expenditure is the Leipzig Trade Fair Center, opened in 1996. It's known as the Messe.
This is the main Messe building, and it's part of the investment which has been done during the 1990s. We financed, of course, by Western German money, and it's part of the economic success of Leipzig.
It's a very, very impressive set of buildings, I must say. We've come to Leipzig's annual Skills and Crafts Fair. It's a perfect illustration of the emphasis on training that gives Germany its competitive edge. From what I can see, the local economy is flourishing. But making the backward East competitive was achieved at a cost that nearly crippled Germany. So after incurring the immense costs of reunification, how did Germany become competitive again?
So the main channel was via real wage cuts. So in the mid-1990s, pensions were cut, in general social security benefits were curtailed, and the austerity in the public sector also was extended to the private sector. And therefore, as a result, real wages in Germany mainly remained constant or even declined.
So for how long has the average German not seen any increase in his living standard?
So more than 15 years.
15 years without any increase in living standards?
Yes. And they have increased in Greece and other southern European countries substantially.
And Germans don't feel too good about that?
Yes, they have brought very large sacrifices, and of course they are worried that they have to go on with these sacrifices.
The Germans' decade of austerity has some similarity to what Greece is going through today. When the euro was introduced, it did little for most Germans' living standards. I wonder whether Gunther regrets saying Auf Wiedersehen to the Deutschmark. So Gunther, I've got here, you'll remember these, some German marks.
These are German marks and
I got
euros.
some euros. Now, which do you choose for Germany for the future?
I choose the euro for the German future. The welfare in Europe will strongly hinge on a common currency, but this needs to be underpinned by the necessary reforms.
At the fair, I run into Lars Heinrich from the Porsche factory. As a younger worker, he's benefited from the recent investment in East Germany. His father Gerold, on the other hand, lost the steady job he once had and hasn't worked since.
What is now being asked of Greece is really not as big an adjustment as was asked of the East German people over the last 20 years.
Also von dem, was wir leisten müssen und bekommen, und die Kriegen nicht so viel leisten wollen und aber dasselbe bekommen, das finde ich in dem Moment nicht richtig. Also wenn die das Gleiche haben wollen wie wir, müssen die genauso arbeiten wie wir.
Despite their obvious frustration with the Greeks, the Germans here have all been giving me the same response. Without exception, they've bought into the idea that the euro is part of a future for which they've already made large sacrifices. Well, maybe. But it's also a measure of Germany's more sophisticated economy that it could make such changes without the sort of upheavals that Greece is experiencing.
In the medieval era, two German cities prospered because they found themselves at the crossroads of great European trade routes. Then after World War II, Leipzig found itself in the communist East and Frankfurt in the capitalist West. Now as I travel between one and the other, there's no border to cross, but I am exchanging the low-slung car factories of Leipzig for the skyscrapers of Germany's financial capital on the River Main.
Here in this cluster of sleek buildings is the European Central Bank. And almost next door, the headquarters of Commerzbank. German financial institutions have been among the largest lenders to the Greek government. Last year, Commerzbank lost 800 million euros on its Greek loans.
Morgan.
The bank's chief economist, Jörg Kramer, believes the roots of the Greek crisis go back 20 years. Back then, the Maastricht Treaty set out the ground rules for a single currency.
European community ministers have signed the new treaty committing the 12 member countries to closer economic and political union.
On paper, at least, countries signing up for the euro had to meet tough criteria on budget deficits and government debt, with no bailouts for spendthrift governments. But no one took any of the rules too seriously.
How did Germans, for example, get lured into lending to Greece, do you think?
Well, I think you have to understand the history of the European Monetary Union. We had a non-bailout clause in the Maastricht Treaty. But
may it rest in peace.
Yeah, but nobody believed it from the very beginning. Therefore, everybody thought, well, we can invest in Greece, and if any problem may pop up in the end, other countries will bail out Greece. This was the underlying belief of all investors, not only in Germany.
But it was put into the euro with Germany. I mean, was this not the most extraordinary mistake?
Yeah, absolutely. And the Bundesbank in public said that Greece is not ripe to enter the European Monetary Union.
So does it follow, if Greece should not have been in the euro, that it would be best if Greece were now out of the euro?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I think.
So is that the way forward?
With Greece on board, it's I think not possible to make a fresh start for the Eurozone. I think everybody knows it.
At last, I found someone who shares some of my sentiments. But aren't the Germans being a bit hard on the Greeks? Hasn't their thirst for German products contributed to Germany's prosperity?
They're already politics, you know. We have to give them a chance to pick up their economy anymore, and they are really on the limit.
Here in the economic powerhouse of Europe, I've learnt something of the dilemmas facing the Germans. They're thought to be very wealthy, but after years of pay restraint, many don't feel rich at all. They believe in discipline within the Eurozone, but they don't want to be thought authoritarian. They feel solidarity with poorer southern Europeans, but they don't want to throw good money after bad. They're willing to help out, but not to be drawn into permanent subsidies.
Frankfurt may be the financial heart of Germany, but the political power still lies in Berlin. Officially, the European institutions make the rules for the euro's future, but many suspect that the real decisions are made here.
I'm in Berlin to meet one of the most powerful men in Europe, Mr. Wolfgang Schäuble. Doesn't actually normally dress like that, but that's the way he's been depicted in the Greek press. And his boss, Angela Merkel, gets the same treatment. I wonder how Mr. Schäuble feels about that. Morgan. I'm really looking forward to this meeting. Wolfgang Schäuble really is one of the key figures. He's the guardian of German monetary orthodoxy, and he's the scourge of the Greeks for their profligacy and failure to pay their taxes. Guten Morgen. Ich besuche Herr Minister Schäuble, bitte schön.
Okay, come in, please.
Danke. You've probably seen the way that some of the Greek papers have been depicting you, and indeed the way they've been depicting Angela Merkel. I mean, how do you feel about this?
Ich habe gelegentlich schon in deutschen Zeitungen ähnliche Karikaturen gesehen. Und wenn ich mir anschaue, wie britische Politiker in britischen Zeitungen karikiert werden, dann muss ich damit leben.
Do you really think that with the austerity measures in Greece, Greece can ever recover?
Ja, ich glaube schon. Es muss seine Staatsfinanzen in Ordnung bringen und es muss durch strukturelle Reformen Wettbewerbsfähigkeit gewinnen. Andernfalls hat Griechenland unter dem verschärften Wettbewerb der globalisierten Wirtschaft keine Chance.
A number of European leaders have commented that Greece should never have been in the euro. Does it not follow logically that Greece should not be in the euro today, that actually things would be much easier for the euro if Greece were not a member?
Aber das ist verschüttete Milch und um die soll man sich nicht bemühen. Griechenland ist Mitglied der Eurozone. Die Eurozone beruht auf dem Prinzip, dass wer zur Eurozone gehört, auch Teil dieser Eurozone bleibt und dass die Mitglieder der Eurozone in der Lage sind, die Stabilität des Euros als Ganzes zu gewährleisten.
Do you feel that democracy is a casualty of this crisis or indeed of this system?
Nein, die Demokratie wird eher gestärkt. Das Europäische Parlament ist genauso ein demokratisch gewähltes Parlament wie das britische Unterhaus und der Deutsche Bundestag. Die Europäische Kommission ist durch die Regierungen gebildet, aber ohne die Zustimmung des Europäischen Parlaments gibt es keine Europäische Kommission. Und natürlich ist klar, europäische Integration heißt, dass wir Schritt für Schritt nationale Souveränität ergänzen durch europäische institutionelle Regelungen. Für einen Euroskeptiker in Großbritannien ist das ein bisschen schwer zu akzeptieren. Deswegen muss man immer wieder dafür werben, dass es die bessere Lösung für das 21. Jahrhundert ist.
From Berlin, I'm going to go back to Greece, the place where the impact of policies made here is really felt. Since I was last in Athens, a lot has happened. The Greeks have done a deal with their creditors to write off vast amounts of debt. That's enabled them to borrow much more from the European Union and the IMF, and that way they've been able to pay interest on old debt. They've cleared a number of hurdles, but my feeling is they've got many more yet to scale. I'm back in Athens for an interview with Lucas Papademos, the Prime Minister appointed caretaker last November. For now, the riots have ceased. But real incomes are still falling, and almost 1 in 10 people here is now taking some form of handout of food or medicine. The huge sacrifices being made here are not just financial.
500 και μερίδες.
Πάνω από 500 το μεσημεριανό, Ωραία, ωραία.
Dimitra Noussi is still administering the provision of food supplies in the city centre.
Has anything changed since I was last here?
There are more people asking for help. There are more families who come here asking for a plastic bag of supermarket products for home. These people do not feel as ashamed as they used to feel before.
You're seeing the hard end of what's happening in Greece today, and it's happening under the euro. So I have to ask you for the future. Would you choose the euro or the drachma?
I prefer euro, but controlled by another European policy, by other politicians maybe, by another political mentality that is closer to the European culture.
Many things that have happened in Greece recently have been dictated from outside Greece, have been dictated by the European Union. How do you feel about it?
We belong to a union.
How do you feel about it?
Inevitably, some things are dictated by outside.
You don't mind that?
It's one of the rules of the union. I think everybody has to admit it.
The Prime Minister in Greece at the moment is not elected. He was appointed. How do you feel about that?
Oh, I don't feel very bad about that. I cannot say simply that he's appointed. It is not a violation of our institutions. There is a kind of approval. We know that. We feel that. I think it's a kind of consensus that exists in Europe and in Greece as well.
It's a sign of the times that, like its financially challenged neighbour Italy, Greece has been governed by an unelected Eurocrat. Lucas Papademos was also once governor of the Greek Central Bank. He was appointed Prime Minister to direct Greece's compliance with the tough conditions set by its foreign lenders. Prime Minister.
Hello, very nice to meet you.
What a pleasure. Thank you so much for seeing us.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Sit over there. I'll take my usual chair.
His 5 months as Premier haven't been comfortable.
Well, Prime Minister, I'm not sure that I envy you your job. You've had a very difficult time indeed, haven't you?
I have to agree with that. It has been a very challenging period.
Where will the growth actually come from? What will enable Greece to become more competitive?
We are already implementing significant and far-reaching reforms in the labour market that will improve its efficiency and restore cost competitiveness.
As Europe moves forward to ever closer political union, how is the democratic deficit going to be plugged? How can you set up a democracy at the European level when there isn't really a European people? How do we deal with that issue?
For a country that participates in a monetary union, inevitably there is a certain loss of autonomy of economic policy. I would not call this a loss of democratic control. So governments are accepting, I would say in a democratic way, this loss of autonomy because it's necessary for the efficient functioning of monetary union, which is presumably accepted because of the benefit it entails.
But if you're losing autonomy at the national level, don't you have to establish a new democracy at the European level, and that's what seems to me incredibly difficult to do.
If they are accepted by the people, I would not call it loss of democratic autonomy, the same way that in a given country, authorities have a certain power because the people have decided to assign these powers to this authority.
You have a debt that is vastly more than 100% of your economy. Can I not tempt you to go back?
I think this is my signature. Yes, it does. But I wouldn't go back to this, although it's a beautiful banknote. The Greek people are suffering, and it's true. They have made many sacrifices over the past few years, but more than 70% do support the continuing participation in the euro.
I've been surprised by how consistently everyone that I've met on my travels has disagreed with me about the future of the euro. To me, the crisis exposes the fundamental economic and cultural incompatibilities of the richer North and the weaker South. To them, that's a challenge for which they're seeking political solutions that I fear may lead to an undemocratic federal Europe. I want to put my concerns to two people that I met last time, Yason Manolopoulos and Tassos Teleglu, and also to the outgoing socialist MP Eva Kaili. To have a democratic control would require a European people. But there isn't a European people. We're still very much nation states, and we focus upon our own national political situation. So how can this so-called democratic deficit be filled?
They have to really find a way to combine North with South. They have to let people realize that this is a union that puts people first. The way to face it is to realize that we have to create a different plan inside the Eurozone. It has to work. We have to make it work. We're trying to. Germany wants it. France wants it. I do think that UK will come back to.
Do you know the expression, over my dead body?
Your one, I know.
Yes, well, where are you on this?
The democracy we had over the last 30 years didn't produce much for the country and left us in a dismal state. So I'm not sure the democracy we had served the Greek citizens in a good form.
So you don't really feel nostalgic for Greece's modern democracy?
Greece, not at all, no.
If people associate democracy with failure, that means maybe they won't love democracy very much, they won't defend democracy.
But for Greece, at this point in time, it's the lesser of two evils. So let's get our shop into shape. Since we haven't been able to control the state and make Greece a fully functioning capitalist economy, with, creating jobs, so on and so forth, we might as well take this.
I think there is only one answer, which is the federalization, the even deeper federalization, like the ancestors of the European Union have dreamed of. I don't see any other technical or political solution. European Commission should be a kind of European government, which I don't think is something awful for British ears.
No, it's awful for British ears, yes, yes.
Europe will face a dilemma that's like the pill you have to take from the doctor. You either swallow it or you die. And if you want to compete with the Chinese, the Asian, and the North American markets, you have to go to this federalization.
The views expressed by my Greek friends are reflected in opinion polls across the Eurozone, where the majority supports the idea of a more centralized Europe. And yet to me, they do so without any clear notion of how this new Europe would work as a democracy. Throughout the continent, governments are faltering as they face public opposition to the austerity measures. And now the voters of Greece and France have punished the politicians who tried to impose them. People want the euro, but don't seem prepared to accept the tough conditions attached. And in my view, this means that the great euro crisis is a long way from being solved. When the Athenians invented democracy 2,500 years ago, the philosopher Plato predicted disaster. I fear that democracy has led politicians to out-promise each other, offering goodies that are enjoyed today but must be paid for in the future. That's been easy during decades of rising living standards. But can democracies cope with an entirely new situation, where instead of meeting increasing expectations, they can offer only cuts and struggle to manage decline. As a convinced Democrat, I hope that Plato may yet be proved wrong. But as a confirmed Eurosceptic, I see further troubles ahead.
Stay with us here on BBC HD. It was break rather than make for the candidate coming up next on The Apprentice, You're Fired.